Wasn't quite how I wanted that to go, but that pulled the top loose. And come straight up with it. YouTube, how's it going? Welcome back to AJ's Garage. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, I hope you please consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it. I've got a lot of great content coming up on the channel, and one thing is a new project. It's something completely different than what I'm used to or what I normally work on. I'm actually ordering a few parts right now, so you guys will see that coming up here in the near future. But as far as today's video, I'm going to be going over the parts needed to swap over the 74 F350 to a 4-speed. It currently has a C6 automatic, and the C6 has a crack in the casing, so I'm pretty sure that transmission is done. So we're going to swap it over to a 4-speed. I was lucky enough to come across a 74 F250 that someone was parting out, and I got pretty much all the parts that I needed off of that. Now I did have some of them already, but we're going to be going over the parts that you will need, and then in videos down the road I'll be going over the swap process. So thank you guys for tuning in. Alright guys, so this is just about everything that I'm going to need for the 4-speed swap. There are a few small minor odds and ends that I probably still need to order, but I'll go over those of course in more detail once we start the conversion. I was lucky enough to be able to get all this stuff off of a 74 F250, so same model year as the dually 74 F350. So these are original parts. Some of this stuff isn't reproduced, so it makes it nice to have all this. So starting off with the bell housing and the cover for that. So I have all the hardware, came off of the truck. One important piece is the wiring, which engages your backup lights. So of course we'll go over that once we get there. Picked up the shifter boot, so it's in really good shape. You also have, this is a little rubber boot for the shifter rod, so this will go to your Z-bar and then up to the pedal assembly. And then this is the boot for the clutch fork, which goes on the bell housing here. So the transmission tunnel cover, I did have one of these already. Got it at the junkyard. This one is in way better shape. Just has a little bit of surface rust on here. And honestly, I'm probably just gonna leave it alone. No holes drilled in it. So we're gonna put this one on the truck. Went over the, let's see what the actual name of it is. Doesn't have it. I ordered this off of LMC, but this is what will actuate your clutch pedal, which will engage the Z-bar and disengage your clutch. You have your clutch fork, so that will go secured onto the bell housing. The Z-bar, so again, I had one of these, picked it up at Turner's. The one at Turner's had 2 holes. It was for later model year, but what I like is that this one has a pin here already in it. So then you will just use a cotter pin to locate what goes on this side. This hole, of course, from years of use has kind of come out towards the edge. So we'll probably weld this all back up and then re-drill and center a hole. This is your bracket with the pivot that goes to the frame side. And then one of the pieces that is not reproduced and was pretty difficult to find, I actually had ordered one off of eBay, and then this one came off of the parts truck. So this is a pivot bracket for an FE engine. These are not reproduced and they're pretty difficult to find. So if you guys are looking to do this swap and you have an FE, this is probably going to be your most difficult piece. Hardware, so I won't go over into too much detail into that. This is transmission to bell housing bolts. These are bell housing to engine. and just a few other little odds and ends, things that I've ordered. We have some new pedal pads for the pedal assembly. So this you will also have to source from a parts truck. I actually had already picked this up at the junkyard. And if you guys are familiar with these, one thing I did is I cut off the sensor bracket for the brake lights. So another thing I'm doing, if you guys have already seen the video, is I redid the brakes on the dually. So I'm going to install a new Willwood proportioning valve, which will have your engagement for the brakes up there. So I'm going to take this all apart. We're going to switch to a Mustang Steve's bearing kit for this. So it should be a lot smoother. I'll get that welded on. I'm going to get this sandblasted and powder coated, so it's going to look really, really nice. And that pretty much covers everything that you're going to need for the swap. So now that I've gone over most of the smaller pieces needed for the swap, moving on to the most important part of it, and of course that's the transmission. As you guys can see, I do have two options, so I'll get into each one of these in just a second. But another part that you will have to replace is your intermediate drive shaft. So I pulled this off of the 74 parts truck. I just removed the back half since I don't need it, and the reason you have to replace this is that this piece is actually longer than the one that's currently in the truck for the C6 automatic. Before I do get this in there, I am going to change this carrier bearing. I'm going to order a new one, and then I'm going to also replace the U-joints with greasable U-joints. That way I'm able to service the drive shaft. Two more parts that I am going to order new: a flywheel and a clutch kit, so I'll go over those when they do come in. But going over each transmission, so we'll start with the T19 here. This came out of a 87 IDI diesel. Now, the ones that were in the diesels and the 460s were geared a little differently. They're what you call a close ratio. So first gear is not a granny gear, which I kind of like the idea of not having to shift out of first at 5 miles an hour. So I'm really leaning towards putting this in the truck. It's also got all the gears are fully synchronized, where I believe on the T18 it's just second, third, and fourth. One thing I would have to change with this is the output yoke. I just need to grab a different one to fit this drive shaft, so that shouldn't be too difficult. This one does shift really, really smoothly, so I really am leaning towards putting the T19 in the truck. And the T18 did also get that off of the 74 parts truck. I did have a little bit of an issue as the shifter was stuck, but I figured that out. But I am gonna pull the case off the top so we can get a look and make sure everything's okay. Doesn't shift as smoothly, so I really am leaning towards the T19. It's got a granny gear, so I'd have to shift immediately out of first at like 5 miles an hour. I've only driven a 4-speed truck once, and I was honestly really surprised at how quickly I had to shift out of first. So that's my choice. Right now I'm leaning towards this one, but it could change. So let's open the T18 up and make sure that everything looks good in there. Wasn't quite how I wanted that to go, but that pulled the top loose. And come straight up with it. Set this down. A little piece of dirt. Oil looks nice and clean, actually. And everything looks good. Now, of course, I've never worked on transmissions, or to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure what I'm looking at. But I don't see any teeth missing or chipped or anything like that. I do see a few little grooves at the ends of these. So I'm not sure if that's just some wear. So that's reverse, I believe. Because as I'm rotating it to the right with my hand, the front input shaft is spinning to the left. And then that takes it out of reverse. I'm sorry if it's a little bit noisy, if you guys can hear that. My neighbors across the street, looks like they're getting some work done on their house. But now that we've pulled the cover off and inspected everything, all the gears look great. So I'm very happy that there's no issues there. So getting the top cover back on, I do still plan on changing all the fluid. We're gonna change the seal up here at top, and I do wanna pull off the access to the PTO on this right side to replace that gasket, and just to get kind of a good look at the bottom of the transmission, clean it out to make sure there's nothing in there. But getting the top cover back on, or let me go over that actually, as to why it wasn't shifting. So it'll be very hard to show you guys from this top point here, but right in here, there are grooves in there, and that's how you shift the transmission. You pull the shifter over, push it up or down, which will move these rods. So looking at it from the top here, it was this one that was out of place. It was moved down. So I just took a pry bar and as gently as I could to make sure I didn't damage anything, and lined it back up with the 3, put the shifter back in, and everything was good. So getting this back on, these hands here align with those. And then you also have to make sure that this reverse lever here fits in this groove. So just have to be very careful getting that back on. It might take a few tries, take your time, but we'll get this back on and we'll just review everything that we've gone over. So that wraps up the parts introduction for the 4-speed swap. Like I mentioned, there are a few things that I still need to order, so I will go over those when they do come in, and any other small little changes during the swap process. One thing that I did forget to mention is specific to the pedal assembly. Now, you guys should be able to do this swap with any of your bump side or dent side trucks, but there are some small differences, mainly being in the pedal assembly. 67 model year was a pedal assembly specific to that year only. 68 to 72, I believe, was about the same. And then within the dent side trucks, the pedal assembly from 73 to 75 or 6 was the same. And then the later years was a little bit different, mainly having to do with the distance from the firewall to the pedal pivot. So you do kind of have to be careful if you're going to the junkyard to pick out a pedal assembly. Just keep that in mind. Now, if you're lucky enough, like I was, to find a parts truck, you can pull everything off of that. I did get my pedal assembly at the junkyard, but I did get one for a 76, so that should fit the 74. Guess we'll find out.